Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. Julia decided in early childhood on a truth that seemed undeniable. Girls are either captivatingly beautiful or piercingly intelligent. The girl, endowed with rare insight, understood perfectly that the choice was hers, and without hesitation stepped onto the path of wisdom. Before her eyes always loomed the example of her older sister, Elena. Elena was the embodiment of that very beauty everyone admired. Her hair flowed like silk, light brown like morning mist. Her eyes shone with a mermaid's green, and her figure, it was usually called model-like. From a young age, Elena was entirely absorbed in her appearance. She read, yes, but her reading was limited to glossy magazines with tips on makeup, diets, and everything related to maintaining an ideal image. And Elena's girlfriends were just like her, pretty, frivolous, like moths fluttering over life. Julia, watching them, mentally christened them pretty little fools. Their mother, bearing the burden of raising two daughters alone, placed special hopes on the elder. "Just marry well, Elena, and we'll be set," she often repeated, like an incantation. Julia, in those years, was still quite small, a primary school student. The little girl sincerely wondered, how could one shift the responsibility for one's own happiness and well-being onto another person's shoulders? Had her mother, having already been burned on this path once, learned no lessons? One day, Julia dared to ask her mother a direct, almost audacious question. "Didn't you marry Dad because of his money, and he left us, went to someone younger and prettier, and didn't even leave anything to you or us kids because her appetites turned out to be good, and now you're teaching Elena the same thing, so she'll end up the same way?" "Jinx your tongue!" her mother exclaimed, throwing up her hands as if warding off bad thoughts. "Elena is completely different. Firstly, she's young. Secondly, she's much prettier than me, and besides, she has me. I had to figure everything out myself, but I'll guide her, teach her everything. Everything will be fine for Elena, and for you too, if you listen to me." Julia just sighed heavily then. Her mother was, undoubtedly, beautiful and kind, but annoyingly frivolous. Both her mother and Elena lived as if in a pink haze, nurturing dreams of a beautiful life and sincerely believing that appearance was the main, if not the only, key to a woman's success. Julia differed from her peers not only in her views, but also in her character. She was firmly convinced to achieve something in this life, one must work hard and persistently. The options her mother and older sister had in mind, rich benefactor men, seemed to her shaky, unreliable, illusory. Elena jokingly called her younger sister a bore. Their mother, meanwhile, constantly tried to remold Julia to her own pattern, to impose her own point of view on her daughter. The most striking thing was that the parents sincerely believed she wished her child well. "I'm worried about your future. How can you not understand? You turned out to be such a beauty. You took the best from me and your father. Finish school. We'll find you a wealthy groom. Just don't be such a grouch. Men like cheerful and smiling girls." "No, thank you. After school, I'm going to study economics," Julia replied, looking her mother firmly in the eye. "Do you know what the competition is like there?" Elena immediately joined the argument. "You either have to be a genius or have good connections." "Yes," sighed her mother, "we can't afford commercial education, and you won't get in for free." But Julia, trying not to listen to these arguments, like the sound of the wind, steadily pursued her goal. Day and night she pored over textbooks, searched for additional online courses, mostly free, because her mother, who worked as a cashier in a local supermarket, simply had no money for her daughter's education. Her father was barely involved in their lives. He had a new family. Of course, he transferred some paltry child support payments, but that was it. No communication, no support, no help in difficult moments. Julia learned from childhood. She couldn't count on him. Deep down, the girl dreamed of meeting and talking to her second parent at least once. It seemed to her that perhaps she took after him in character, because Julia was completely unlike her mother and Elena. But he didn't seek meetings with his daughters. And Julia? She didn't want to impose herself, and it was scary to face indifference or worse, dislike from a blood relative. Her father was a businessman, owned a chain of stores, and seemed to make good money. The property was prudently registered in his new wife's name so that his ex-wife and children couldn't claim anything. It looked ugly, petty. Julia, in theory, should have been as offended by her father as her mother was, as Elena was. But Julia had a different dream: to study economics, start her own business, and one day meet her father on some business matter. A joint project, a profitable contract, something that would put them on equal footing. Let him see what his daughter achieved on her own, without his help. And then perhaps they could talk. And Julia got her wish. She was accepted on a government scholarship to the very economics faculty she so passionately desired. How happy she was to see her name on the list of admitted students. She shouted right in front of the computer monitor, jumped for joy, almost touching the ceiling. "Are you crazy?" Elena peeked into the room, holding little Ian in her arms. She had recently become a mother, giving birth to a son from a wealthy man. He regularly paid child support for the child, but had no desire to communicate with his mother or even with Ian himself. Need I say that this child support was mere pennies? A standard scheme, grey income, most earnings hidden. Elena did, after all, repeat her mother's fate, only in an even more bitter version. But she wasn't going to give up, and continued to dream of a prince who would surely solve all her financial problems sooner or later. Her mother supported her older daughter in everything, adored her grandson. That was completely natural. Julia also enjoyed playing with the baby when she had time. But the girl saw you can make as many plans as you want, but if they are based on hope in another person, it's shaky and often leads to disappointment. It was time to choose a different path. But no, Elena still spent her time on dating sites, looking for bigger prey. "I got in," Julia explained the reason for her wild delight to her sister. "Wow, cool. Does that mean you're moving out, going to the city to study?" Julia and her family actually lived in a city too, but a very small one, far from the regional centre. Grey 3-story buildings, entire streets of old wooden barracks, a huge private sector. On paper, of course, not a village, but essentially. That's why Orakhovsk, the regional capital where Julia's university was located, everyone just called it the city. Her mother was also happy to hear about her younger daughter's acceptance. As it turned out, she hadn't even hoped for such an outcome. She thought, let the little one be stubborn, and then, having listened to her more experienced relatives, she'll realize she needs to find a rich and reliable man. But look how things turned out. "You got in. Well done, daughter." Her mother hugged the younger one, moved to tears. "I'll help you however I can. I'm sorry, I won't be able to send much money, but I'll find a little for housing and living expenses. And besides, you need to dress nicely in the big city, and there are more chances to meet a decent man." "Mom, there you go again." Julia smiled. She was touched that her mother supported and understood her and even offered help. Julia knew this money didn't come easily to her mother, but she was ready to help her daughter while she was still a student. And that was priceless. Julia's new life began. She was allocated a room in the student dormitory, not a private one, though. She had to share the space with 2 other girls. But her roommates turned out to be remarkably pleasant. Both were studying at the Pedagogical Institute. Both, like Julia herself, were focused on their studies and future work. In short, the girls found a lot in common. Julia quickly became friends with one of them, Kate. They continued to communicate even after they each finished their universities and moved into rented apartments. Julia liked her studies. In her very first year, she became completely convinced that she had chosen the right direction. Economic sciences came easily to her, lectures seemed fascinatingly interesting, and term papers and tests were ridiculously easy. Julia even started earning some extra money. It turned out that people were willing to pay considerable sums for essays and projects. Considerable, of course, by a student's standards. The girl had to work hard and study hard. She had absolutely no time for student parties, clubbing, or other entertainment. And sometimes, of course, she wanted to go out to unwind. But the girl understood. Every minute counted. Her time was too precious. Besides, money was scarce. Her mother sent her a small amount every month. Julia knew that this was a significant part of her parents' salary and was immensely grateful. It was little, very little, but still it was her mother's help that allowed Julia to stay afloat. Especially after her 3rd year, when something suddenly changed at the university clinic and students were required to pay for the dormitory. Before that, you could live there for free. Julia saved on literally everything but didn't lose heart. She knew she was working towards her goal, which meant that sooner or later everything would be fine. Everything would be just as she had dreamed it would be. But before the new year, an event occurred that forced Julia to rethink all her plans and literally turned her whole life upside down. It happened during that anxious time when students rush to pass all their credits before the holidays so they can start the winter session without debts after the new year. Julia was just preparing for her economic history credit when her sister called. Elena's photo flashed on the phone screen. In it, the girl was smiling broadly and looked like a movie star. Julia immediately felt that something was wrong. Otherwise, Elena wouldn't call her out of the blue at 1 a.m. It was Julia who was awake, preparing for exams, while her sister should have been fast asleep by then. "Something's happened to Mom!" Elena's voice, ringing and breaking, came through the receiver. It seemed she was on the verge of hysteria. "Come home!" What happened? Julia felt her limbs grow cold, and her stomach suddenly felt very empty. Anxiety squeezed her heart with an icy, rough hand. "Bus, what, when she's alive?" It was completely impossible to get clear answers from Elena. She was already sobbing and gasping into the phone, dropping only isolated, incoherent phrases. Mostly, it was wailing about how scared and awful she felt right now. Apparently, the trouble happened in the evening, but Elena was only informed just now, literally a couple of minutes ago, and she immediately called her sister. Of course, there was no talk of credits or exams at that moment. In the morning, Julia took the first bus home. At the bus station at such an early hour, she was almost the only passenger. Julia found her sister in a terrible state, dishevelled hair, face swollen from tears. In her arms, she held her youngest daughter, tiny Mila. Elena was already a mother of 3. First, her son Ian was born, then 2 girls, Christina and Mila, born a year apart. None of the fathers participated in raising the children. Princes, sons of wealthy parents, refused to raise offspring and paid them off with paltry child support. They were just having fun with Elena, not meaning anything serious. And me? And them? My own children. If something happens to her, how will I manage alone with them? Elena looked at Julia with bewildered eyes, as if expecting her to offer a solution. But Julia, at that moment, she was ready to hit her sister. Nobody knew what was happening with their mother, and she was only thinking about herself. How did it happen? They told me Mum was crossing the road in the wrong place. She jumped out right in front of that bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock himself. Apparently, he's in the hospital too now. He had a heart attack right there on the spot. While they were sorting things out, they called me late at night, and I immediately called you. So Mom is alive? Julia clarified, freezing with hope. That was the most important thing for her. In the hospital in Morozovskaya, Julia rushed out of the house, calling a taxi as she went. She had to get there as soon as possible, had to understand what was happening with her loved one. At the hospital, Julia was given terrible news. Her mother was gone. She had passed away very recently, at the very moment Julia was hurrying to the clinic. It happened in the intensive care unit. The doctors said the injuries were too severe, and Julia wouldn't have been able to say goodbye to her mother anyway. She was in a coma. And still, the girl blamed herself for not holding her mother's hand while she was still. Julia was signing some papers when the sobbing Elena called her. Someone she knew had brought her to the hospital. It was a difficult, drawn-out time, organising the funeral, exhausting attempts to bring her sister back to her senses, who, despite everything, had to take care of her little ones, and the gradual, painful realisation of the terrible fact: the dearest and closest person in the world was gone. Simply gone, and that was it. Her father didn't show up at the funeral, although, of course, he couldn't have been unaware of what happened. This man didn't even call his daughters, didn't try to understand if they needed his help. Perhaps he considered them adults. Both were over 18, which meant legally their father was no longer considered their debtor. He had paid child support regularly until the daughters reached adulthood, and they couldn't expect more. It was then, at her mother's grave, that Julia finally understood that she would not meet or communicate with this man. Even they, Elena, her mother, and herself, were not needed by him. Nor was he needed by them. Resentment didn't appear. No, Julia simply suddenly realized with piercing clarity that her father was a complete stranger to her. Perhaps they were similar in some ways, but her father, he was a stranger, just a stranger. And that said it all. But Elena was family, and she needed support. Her sister sobbed non-stop for several days, and Julia didn't stop her. Let her cry it out. It would be easier for her. While her sister dealt with her grief, Julia helped her with her nieces and nephews. Even in such a terrible situation, the little ones made her smile. It was impossible to look indifferently at their funny games, to listen to their sweet babbling. More than anything, her nieces and nephews showed Julia, life goes on. Julia couldn't stay with her sister for long. The winter session was waiting. And Elena had already somewhat recovered, even started monitoring dating sites again. Now she wanted an adult, supportive person by her side even more. Her mother was no longer there. Despite everything, Julia passed her session with excellent grades. This meant she could stay in the dormitory, only the dormitory had become paid, and she still needed to eat, dress, pay for transportation. Julia tried to combine studying and working in a cafeteria. It turned out to be impossible. She immediately accumulated a pile of absences and debts. In the end, the girl didn't even get permission to take the next session. Inevitable expulsion loomed ahead. Julia tried to negotiate with the professors, begged them to give her a chance, promised to pass everything, but she still couldn't manage. The only way out was to transfer to distance learning. The snag was that all the government-funded spots were taken, and the commercial option cost an exorbitant amount of money. An unexpected solution was offered by the rector. One day he called Julia to his office and proposed the only option he thought suitable. "I know your situation," the man began the conversation paternally, always reminding Julia of Carlson, just as good-natured, plump and short. "You're a diligent, promising student. I want to help someone like you, so I'll pass your session for you despite everything. Let them be C's, but we'll mark them. And you take an academic leave for a year. I'll help you, you'll manage. You're a determined person, and then you'll re-enroll, and I'll help with all the details again. How does that sound?" Julia thought about it. She really didn't want to interrupt her studies. On the other hand, what other options did she have? The session wasn't passed. That was a fact. That meant expulsion. And where would she go? Go home, to her parents' apartment. Well, Elena's new boyfriend was already living there, a young and seemingly good guy named Stephen. Unlike Elena's previous admirers, he wasn't a rich guy. He worked in construction, toiled from dawn till dusk, and seemed to earn a living. Elena loved him very much, and he had accepted all her children. Perhaps they really would become a family. Julia was completely superfluous there now, and she didn't want to live with her sister herself. No, Julia loved her very much. She was the only relative in the whole world. And yet Julia was used to quiet, solitude, freedom, and there was a large family. It wouldn't be like that there. And finally, she didn't want to leave Orakhovsk. It was a big city. It was beautiful, spacious, interesting. There were more prospects for work and study. The urban-type settlement where Julia spent her childhood was associated by the girl exclusively with longing and hopelessness. No, she absolutely did not want to go back there. "You know, I think I'll take your offer," Julia smiled at the rector, feeling relieved. "That's a good girl," the man beamed. "You're smart. You'll succeed in everything. Just don't forget to save for your studies. Be sure to come back to the university in a year. We'll be waiting for you. Agreed?" Agreed. Having thanked him for the offer, that same evening Julia began a frantic search for work. She urgently needed money just to survive, to buy food, to pay for a roof over her head. The most effective motivation there was. It turned out that finding anything close to her desired profession with an unfinished higher education was simply unrealistic for the girl. Julia was rejected everywhere. Employers didn't even consider candidates without a diploma. The girl understood that she could well prove herself in an interview, but it didn't even get to that point. After a couple of days of fruitless searching, Julia realized it was time to say goodbye to the dream of working as an economist, or rather to postpone it until better times. And for now, she needed to find something, anything that would allow her to hold on. When the bar of expectations lowered somewhat, things went better. Many vacancies were found for Julia: waitress, cleaner, salesperson. True, the salaries offered were meagre. No, it would be enough to live on, especially if she saved on absolutely everything. But Julia needed to save up for her studies in a year. And with such salaries, that was completely impossible. And yet, Julia desperately needed a job, urgently. She chose the path of a waitress in a bar in the city centre. There were enough reasons for this place. First, there was a bonus for night shifts. Second, tips were a great help, sometimes even very generous. And third, shift work gave Julia the opportunity to write term papers and tests for money. It was extra money for her savings, and her brain didn't sit idle. Pure advantages. Julia even liked working at the bar. The staff turned out to be remarkably friendly and cohesive, the management was loyal, and the clientele was decent. It was a rock bar, and the owners cared about their reputation. They paid attention to the atmosphere. Undesirable elements were escorted out by security and not allowed back. And also, musicians gathered there every evening, local bands and performers, visiting guests. In short, live music. And it was wonderful. Julia enjoyed listening to the musicians' performances, singing along to familiar songs. This was welcomed at the bar. Going to work like a holiday. At the bar, Julia finally understood the meaning of that common phrase. Of course, you couldn't save much from a waitress's salary. Julia was simultaneously looking for another, higher-paying job. But the girl knew, even when she had to quit, she would come back here to visit, just to be in this wonderfully warm atmosphere. The rock bar and her new friends helped Julia get through her grief. Of course, the longing for her mother didn't disappear, but the girl was finally able to return to life and believe that there was still a lot of good ahead. It was at the rock bar that Julia met Alex. One day, the host introduced a new rock band to the guests, which had appeared just a couple of months ago. Alex was the bassist, but not only that, it was his idea to create this group. He wrote the songs and music. Modest, always staying in the background, but constantly observing everything. The behavior of the band members, the audience's reaction. Alex was the unspoken leader of the team, although the charismatic vocalist usually stole most of the attention on stage. This was noticeable at first glance. For some reason, Julia immediately singled him out from the crowd and felt an inexplicable attraction. She didn't recognize herself. Julia perfectly understood that she was not in a position to fall in love and start romances right now. She was focused on her career, on her studies, on re-enrolling in the university. She couldn't afford to get distracted by all this. She couldn't lose focus. And yet, Alex didn't joke or flirt with the waitresses. He was focused on his work, immersed in music. Perhaps that's what captivated the girl. Alex was very much like her. Alex started coming to the bar often, sometimes with the band to work, sometimes just with friends to relax. Of course, they soon met, but he still acted somewhat distant, didn't show open affection. Although sometimes Julia did catch his eye. True, Alex immediately turned away, as if caught red-handed. Julia wanted him to pay attention to her, to compliment her, to show her some signs of interest, as visitors often did. And then Julia would let him know that she was interested in him. One day, a girl was in Alex's company. No, female representatives had come with him before, girlfriends, girls from the band. But there was clearly something special between her and Alex. They didn't kiss or hug, nothing so obvious. But sometimes they exchanged tender glances and smiled very warmly at each other. And one day she rested her head right on his shoulder, and Alex, usually cold and even stern, stroked her hair with a natural, very gentle gesture, like a kitten. An unpleasant feeling stirred in Julia's chest. She, of course, immediately recognized it. It was jealousy. With surprising meticulousness, Julia began to search for flaws in her rival. Too thin, even scrawny, it wasn't attractive. A long nose. Her hair was somehow too thin. In short, how could this madam compare to her, to Julia? It seemed that for the first time in her life, Julia felt smug about her appearance. Nature had endowed her, like Elena, with beauty. Julia had heard compliments about her figure many times, tall, slender, long-legged. Her girlfriends even unanimously advised her to try modelling. Only that job was not to Julia's liking at all. She didn't know how to display herself, even considered it somewhat humiliating. Despite such impressive looks, Julia's rival turned out to be such a blue-stocking. In short, there was nothing remarkable about Alex's companion, nothing to catch the eye. Nevertheless, he clearly felt very tender feelings for her. The presence of this girl made him happy. Julia watched Alex carefully and could say with certainty, this was true. He loved his companion. It hurt. Thanks to the girl who clung to Alex so much, Julia finally decided. She decided on something she had previously considered completely unacceptable for herself. Her shift was coming to an end, but as usual, she stayed late to help her waitress friend serve tables. It was Saturday evening. Julia was waiting for the right moment. Before that, she had a drink for courage, to feel more confident and relaxed. Alex stood up and headed for the exit. Someone had called him. The music was blasting in the bar. It was impossible to talk on the phone in such an environment. Everyone went out, some to the street, to the bar's porch, some to the smoking area. Alex chose the street. Julia followed him like a shadow, now or never. The unpleasant girl who had been sitting next to Alex all evening remained at the table. She was chatting cheerfully with his friends. It was clear they had known each other for a long time. It was probably a long and serious relationship. And yet Julia would try. Otherwise, she would regret it later, that she didn't even try. Alex stepped out onto the porch. He paced the small area in front of the bar with long strides and patiently explained something to someone. Julia watched him through the large window on the door. Alex wasn't smiling, wasn't joking. The conversation was clearly serious or unpleasant. It didn't matter. Julia would still approach him. As soon as Alex hung up and was about to go back into the bar, Julia came out to meet him. Fortunately, they were completely alone on the porch at that moment. "Hi," Julia smiled at him, feeling her voice tremble. "Hi." Alex looked at the girl with interest. Surprise flickered in his eyes. "Didn't we already say hello?" "Yes, we did," Julia nodded, trying to control her trembling. I need to talk to you." Alex immediately stopped somehow, prepared himself for the conversation, showing with his whole demeanour that he was ready to listen to his interlocutor. After all, he could have waved her off or shown irritation, displeasure. But Alex looked at her with his dark, intelligent eyes and waited. I like you, and I have for a long time." Julia decided to get straight to the point, as if diving into cold water. I don't know how to explain it. I feel drawn to you like a magnet. I've never felt this way before. I don't know what to do with all this." Julia lowered her eyes, feeling her cheeks burn. Well, she had said it. What now? Alex was probably looking for words right now to politely dismiss her. Most likely that was the case. Julia suddenly felt unbearably ashamed of her action. Why did she approach him? How could she look him in the eye after all this? "Julia?" In the next moment, the girl felt a gentle touch, as if she were some incredibly fragile vessel. Julia. Her own name, slipping from Alex's lips, sounded like beautiful, unearthly music to the girl. Julia, I couldn't even imagine such a thing. Alex looked at her and smiled. And he smiled so rarely. His eyes, the girl saw clearly, shone with happiness, sincere, real. What was happening? Was he happy about her confession? Instead of words, Alex kissed Julia. The girl's head spun from it all, as if in a whirlwind. He hugged her, or rather held her, because the girl's legs literally buckled. He kissed her, then stroked her back and head, gently pressed her to him. "I've been watching you for a long time too, and I feel drawn to you just the same way." "Then why? I never even noticed anything. I thought you didn't care." "Didn't want to embarrass you, probably in vain. And anyway, I'm older, too old for you. I thought you were attracted to completely different guys, brutal, successful. With looks like yours, anything is possible. Your unreal beauty. You even inspired a song in me. I realized that Elven Princess is about you." "No," Julia admitted, smiling shyly. "It's a very beautiful song. I like it. I never thought that it came about thanks to you." "Well, yes, only—" "And that girl who came with you, are you together?" "Together?" Alex couldn't help but chuckle. His eyes sparkled with amusement. "Together since our parents brought home a bundle tied with a pink ribbon from the maternity hospital and said, 'My sister.'" "So she's your sister!" Julia laughed out loud, feeling a huge weight lifted from her soul. "And I thought, that's why I decided to have this conversation today." "Sister, sister." Alex held Julia closer and inhaled the scent of her hair like the most precious fragrance. "Just passing through the city. She's been married for a long time, lives far away with her husband. She missed her wayward brother." Julia and Alex started dating. It turned out that all this time he had indeed been attracted to the beautiful waitress. Why hadn't he made any moves? He was going to, but later, when he had more money. He had a clear conviction in his mind. Girls weren't interested in failures. For now, there was too much work with the band, organizing performances, and so on. But the guys were already starting to earn money from their songs. The prospects were looking good. And, strange as it was for a rock musician, Alex was shy when interacting with girls. No, he had many female friends he could chat and laugh with. But Julia, she evoked completely special, tender feelings in him. And this made Alex, who was used to performing in front of hundreds of people, shy. But Julia took the first step, thus dispelling all of Alex's doubts and opening the door to their future together. And so they were together. Alex himself suggested moving in. They decided to choose Julia's apartment to live in, convenient location, reasonable cost, cozy room. So it turned out that Alex moved in with her. But he immediately took on the rent payments and minor repairs that every home periodically needs. And it also turned out that Alex was an excellent cook. A creative person, as a creative person should be, he created real masterpieces, both in the recording studio and in the kitchen. He was tender, sensitive, attentive, completely immersed in his creativity, but without forgetting the person he loved. They talked a lot, often walked around the city at night. Sometimes they discussed the next song that was spinning in Alex's head and was about to be born. It happened that Julia would suggest the right phrase to her beloved, and he would joyfully seize upon the idea. And then the girl felt proud of herself. Well, she had participated in creating a hit. Julia completely dissolved in her feelings and new sensations. Before meeting Alex, she didn't even know what love for a man was like. She hadn't had time for it, first hard studying, then exhausting attempts to survive. It turned out it was pleasant to have someone nearby who hugged you, was interested in your mood and well-being, looked at you with admiring eyes, like some kind of princess. And to melt from the touch of warm, strong hands, knowing at the same time that he, this tall man with black eyes, was ready to do anything for you. Elena didn't approve of her sister's choice. As always, she approached everything with her own measure. He's poor. He doesn't even have his own apartment. Again, no stable job, no business. He's a musician. He has his own rock band. So what? Who needs them anyway? There are tons of these one-hit wonder bands. Whether they'll succeed is unknown. I think you've bet on the wrong horse with your looks. You're wrong about this. Okay, me, I have 3 kids. Who needs me? So I settle for what I get. I don't complain. But you. However, Julia didn't expect her sister to understand her. They had always been too different, as if from different planets. But Julia didn't need understanding. She was happy, loved. She had found a close, dear person. Yes, he was going through a difficult period now, but Alex was trying, working towards his goal, working hard, looking for the right contacts, planning something. Julia supported him in all his endeavours, and he appreciated her devotion, saying many times that he was grateful to fate for such a gift, for her. One day, Alex undertook a rather risky venture. He invited a famous rock band to Orakhovsk. The plan was for his band to open for the renowned musicians. This event was supposed to increase Alex's band's popularity, and generally, organising such concerts was a way to make good money. But something went wrong. Not as many spectators came to the concert as planned. A large rock festival was taking place in the neighbouring region. Alex didn't account for this, or rather, he found out about the festival too late, when everything was already set in motion. In short, Alex suffered a big loss. Paying the musicians' fees, renting the hall and equipment, tickets for the rock band, advertising, all this was recouped by only half the money earned from the concert. The concert itself went well, but Alex incurred huge debts that needed to be paid off as soon as possible. But with what? It was hard for Julia to watch her beloved during this period. He looked lost, worried, like a lost child. She wanted to help him in any way she could. But how? Where would she get the money? Alex took out a loan, but it was just a drop in the ocean. Friends helped him. The situation improved a little, but the debt was still quite substantial. And then Julia offered her help. She had savings, money she had been saving for her studies. Not much, of course, but still something. In addition, the girl did something she had been against for a long time. She sold the gold jewellery her mother had given her for her 18th birthday. This money was enough to cover the debt. Where did this come from? Alex was surprised when Julia handed him several stacks of crisp new bills. Well, someone unexpectedly paid back a debt to me. Plus, the insurance finally paid out for Mom's case, the girl lied, looking him straight in the eye. She knew if she told Alex the truth, he would never take the money from her. But this way, it seemed like it wasn't her last resort. Thank you, Alex hugged Julia tightly, pressing her to him. I'll return everything, you'll see. We'll be famous soon, and I'll return everything. Alex paid off the debt and continued to develop the band. Julia slowly paid off the loan. Saving for her studies was now completely impossible. And generally, her salary suddenly became much smaller. The bar was going through difficult times. It was good that Alex bought groceries and paid the apartment rent, meaning he covered the main part of the expenses. Alex's income came from infrequent performances at corporate events and occasional odd jobs. Unstable earnings, but still a stream that didn't dry up, sometimes flush, sometimes lean. Julia didn't worry. She basked in Alex's attention, in his love and care, and generously gave him tenderness, love, and support. Julia tried not to think about the future too much. Well, she wouldn't re-enroll in the university this year. She would do it next year. It was no big deal. She still had time. The main thing was that he, Alex, was by her side. Julia hadn't known before that she was capable of such deep, all-consuming feelings. And then Alex disappeared. No, he didn't run away from Julia. Nothing terrible happened to him. It all started as a business trip. Alex grabbed Julia by the shoulders and even shook her slightly, unable to contain his emotions. His eyes burned like two bright spotlights, illuminating the world around him. Can you imagine? I was invited to the USA to write music for a band. They found me online, they liked it, and now they're inviting me. Julia couldn't believe her ears. She knew the band Alex was talking about. They were very popular musicians, touring all over the world, and they had noticed Alex. They were offering him a collaboration. Incredible. I'll have to leave for a while, Alex continued, his voice trembling with excitement. Do you understand what this means? Julia nodded. She understood. Money, fame, dizzying opportunities for Alex's growth and development as a musician, useful contacts and connections. He would get what he hadn't even dared to dream of. They would have to part for an indefinite time. After all, Alex had clearly said, I'll have to leave. Me, not us. Feverish preparations began. Alex had to settle many issues. First, find a replacement. Someone had to play in his band temporarily while he was away, of course. Second, Alex started applying for a passport and visa. Third, packing the necessary things. In all this hustle, he seemed to completely forget about Julia, as if she didn't exist. Alex was too engrossed in the upcoming changes, the opening prospects. The girl looked at him and understood with bitter clarity. He would forget about her. He would forget her there, in another country, deafened by new impressions, inspired by work and success. Perhaps Alex would even find someone there, someone more suitable for his new status. He hugged her so tenderly in the evenings, so sincerely assured her that he would miss her. Time will fly by quickly, and besides, there's video calls. We'll be in constant contact with each other. At least I'll finally earn a decent living. I'll pay you back the debt. I know how much you need that money. Maybe we'll even buy an apartment. My band will get big. I'll gain invaluable experience there. I'll understand what and how. Everything will be fine. Alex sincerely believed this. Julia saw he wasn't lying, he wasn't being cunning. But something cold and anxious told the girl everything would change as soon as her beloved was abroad. It was just that Alex himself didn't realize it yet. And that's how it turned out in the end. At first, Alex called every day, as he promised, telling her how he had settled into his new place. Everything delighted him, impressions overflowed as if spilling over the brim. Then he suddenly disappeared from the radar, simply vanished. He didn't call himself, and he didn't answer Julia's calls. The long rings consistently ended with a message that the subscriber was apparently busy and couldn't answer. Julia was worried at first, thought something had happened to him, something terrible, irreparable. But soon she saw a recent performance of that very band on a music channel. Alex was with them. He looked very changed, more mature, even more serious than usual. So he was fine. He had simply decided, apparently, to start a new life and cut off all previous ties, including forgetting about her, about Julia. At first, the girl still hoped, waited for him to call, to explain. But Alex disappeared completely, vanished from her life as if he had never been there. Julia made it a rule to watch the music channel every day. From time to time, she saw Alex. He was never in the spotlight, but he did sometimes appear in the camera lens, and quite often a girl was next to him, the same one, either the band's makeup artist or costume designer, beautiful, striking, with a predatory glint in her eyes. Apparently, there was something between her and Alex. There had to be. Julia was desperately jealous of Alex, both of this girl and of her beloved's other potential muses. It hurt her. It hurt more than anything in her life. And she was also hurt to tears and scared. Scared of being alone again, without the support and warmth of a loved one. An unpleasant, poisonous mix of feelings and emotions. And there were other problems, more pressing, more earthly, financial ones. Julia was barely making ends meet. After all, she had a tiny salary and the heavy burden of a loan. In the end, the bar went bankrupt anyway. New owners bought it, turned it into a hookah lounge. Julia had to quit, like all the previous bar employees. Another blow. Julia had special memories and feelings associated with that place, and now the bar was gone. The cozy bar where she could always enjoy live music, where a friendly, warm atmosphere reigned. Alex would have understood her, supported her. Everything was simpler and more pleasant with him. But he was hundreds of miles away from her, and it seemed had already forgotten to even think about her. Alex had no idea of the desperate situation she was in. He never found out about the loan. He thought Julia had helped him with an extra amount she had unexpectedly received. And of course he had no idea about her quitting, and even if he had known, he had no time for Julia now, when the whole world had opened up before him. Julia had no time to dwell on grievances and think about what might have been. She desperately needed a job, preferably a well-paying one. And so the girl tirelessly monitored advertisements, looking for something that would help her climb out of the financial hole. At least the landlord agreed to wait for the payment. But his patience wasn't limitless either. A little more, and Julia would be asked to leave. This advertisement caught Julia's attention with the sum. The sum offered for the services. A pretty good figure. It could solve many of the girl's problems, as if by magic. But the job itself seemed too unfamiliar to Julia. A sitter was required for a little girl. Apparently, she was unwell. The diagnosis wasn't disclosed, but it was made clear. The child needed round-the-clock supervision and care, including taking medication on schedule, accompanying her to procedures, and so on. Julia thought about it. Of course, she had experience taking care of little ones. The girl even liked playing with her nieces and nephews. She knew how to get along with small children, how to feed them, change them, keep them entertained. But here it was about a sick child. Apparently seriously ill. Could she do it? At least it was worth trying. Julia called the number provided. A pleasant male voice answered. This man asked the girl a few questions: age, occupation, education, experience with small children. And she was invited for an interview. Julia was nervous the day before. She wanted this job so badly it made her tremble. She needed it like air. It was such a chance to climb out of the financial hole, to stay afloat. Where else could she find such a salary? So the girl was worried, anxious, as if before an exam on which her whole life depended. What if they didn't hire her? What then? Go back to looking for a waitress job and work for mere pennies? A taxi brought Julia to a suburban cottage community, an elite area, tall, beautiful houses surrounded by impenetrable fences. At the gate, the girl was met by a woman, a housekeeper, as Julia later learned, and in fact, the person on whom everything depended: cleaning, cooking, laundry. Because her employer, Victor, was always too busy. Businessmen generally had very little free time, as if they had none at all. Victor met with the job seeker in the spacious living room. He was a man in his 40s with intelligent, piercing blue eyes that held deep sadness. Perfectly styled hair with a slight greying at the temples, a sporty, fit figure. Yes, This man clearly paid attention to his health and appearance. Julia was initially intimidated, feeling awkward. How to start a conversation with such a person? Next to him, she suddenly felt completely insignificant, small and out of place. "Good morning," Victor smiled warmly, and Julia's embarrassment vanished instantly. The man's smile was open and kind, like a ray of sunshine. Victor immediately seemed like someone she knew, a kindred spirit. "Hello," Julia smiled back, feeling her shyness recede. "I'm here about the advertisement." "That's very good. I'll tell you straight away. I need a sitter for my daughter, Sophie. She's in a very serious condition right now, so it's not something everyone can handle. Her health is monitored by doctors. They come here every day. I could hire a nurse for Sophie, but how can I put this? There's already a lot of pain in her life, a lot of people in white coats. I would like her to have someone else by her side. Well, a young girl like you. Cheerful, knows lots of songs and stories, can cheer up a child, inspire her, come up with some interesting activity. In short, brighten up her leisure time." "And what's wrong with your little girl?" Julia couldn't help but ask, feeling her heart clench. "Who knows?" Victor lowered his eyes, his gaze heavy and strained, as if he carried the weight of the world. "Sophie has been examined everywhere. Nobody can figure anything out. Her body, it's as if it's destroying itself. There are no signs of autoimmune aggression. Her tests are constantly taken, they would have noticed. But she's fading and nothing helps her. Poor little one. The doctors say they can. You understand? It's just, they aren't omnipotent, unfortunately. In short, Sophie needs more than just a nanny. For that, we have Vera, our beloved housekeeper. She'll feed her, give her medicine on time. And we don't just need a sitter either. Sophie is supervised by nurses. They perform all the necessary procedures. Sophie needs more of a friend, perhaps. Someone who can bring her positive emotions. The doctors say it's very important in her condition. And looking at you, I think you're just such a person. Young, beautiful, cheerful, and you have kind eyes. You can empathize. That's good." Julia nodded, feeling a wave of compassion and determination rise within her. She already wanted to see Sophie as soon as possible. If the little one needed positive emotions, she would provide them. Julia would definitely cheer up the girl who had been struck by such a severe illness, brighten the grey days of the little patient, find a way to make her life more pleasant and brighter. "If you're ready to start working right away," Victor continued as if rushing, "then let's begin. A trial period, say 3 days, and then Sophie will decide. Of course, you'll get paid for your time in any case. Well, do you agree?" "Yes," Julia nodded without hesitation. "Excellent," Victor beamed, his face lit up with hope. "Then Vera will introduce you to Sophie, and I must go. Business awaits." When the door silently closed behind Victor, Vera, a middle-aged woman with an incredibly soft and comforting gaze, turned to Julia and asked, "Have you been around little ones before? Do you know what small children are like?" "I have nieces and nephews," Julia nodded. "That's good," Vera shook her head, sadness in her voice. "Only our Sophie. She's an unusual child, you've probably already realized. Sophie hardly gets out of bed. She gets tired quickly. It's hard to interest her in anything, but we have to. We need to distract Sophie from her pain, from her suffering, and we also need to take her for walks. At least an hour a day, the doctors said." "I understand. Well, now let's go meet her." Julia followed Vera upstairs to the second floor. She entered the children's room. It was a spacious room fit for a real princess. A huge window let in plenty of daylight, bathing everything in a soft glow. Shelves lined the walls, filled with expensive toys and bright books. Right in the center of the room was a mini playground. There was a slide, swings, even a trampoline. A little further was a ball pit with colorful balls, and closer to the door, like an island in the midst of this splendor, stood a bed. What a bed it was! Large, round, with a pink canopy cascading in soft folds. Julia looked around with curiosity. She had never seen such rooms before, as if they had come from the pages of fairy tales. Was all this really for one child? Amidst this magnificence, Julia didn't immediately notice the room's tiny mistress. The girl lay in bed surrounded by large soft toys, as if in a sea of plush animals. There was Batten the cat, a fluffy white bear, a bright green crocodile with flowers all over its body, and a thin, pale 7-year-old girl, quite transparent and almost blending with the white bedding due to her unhealthy skin tone. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, looked at the newcomers with curiosity. They held a wisdom and sadness beyond her years. Sophie propped herself up on her elbows, although it cost her great effort, and addressed Vera. "Who is this with you? A new rehabilitation therapist?" The complex words slipped from the little one's lips easily and naturally, and it was somehow completely unnatural for such a fragile creature. "No, sweetie, this is your new friend. Her name is Julia. You'll play together." "With dolls?" Sophie brightened slightly, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Whatever you want," Julia smiled at her, feeling her heart clench with pity. The girl evoked not just sympathy, but deep, piercing pity. "I really love playing with dolls. That's good because Vera is always busy and Dad doesn't know how to play at all." "Adults have a lot to do," Julia shrugged, trying to choose the right words. "That's why they're sometimes boring," Sophie suggested, and smiled conspiratorially, as if sharing a great secret. "Boring," Julia agreed, returning her smile. Sophie laughed softly, her laughter like the ringing of crystal bells. "Well, I see you'll be fine," Vera sighed with relief. "You two have fun here, and I'll go make lunch. And Sophie, you remember the nurses coming today, right?" "I remember," the girl frowned, the joy on her face instantly fading. "Another IV drip?" "Well, what can you do, dear?" Vera kissed the girl on the top of her head and left the room, leaving Julia alone with the little patient. Julia was left alone with Sophie. "Well, shall we play?" the girl asked her charge with a smile. "My eyes are just darting everywhere." "Better read to me," the girl asked, her voice sounding tired. It seemed even that short conversation had drained her last strength. Sophie sank back onto the pillows, pulled the blanket over her thin body, although the room was warm and cozy. "Okay," Julia agreed. She was surprised and horrified by the child's weakness. 7-year-olds. They were such energizers, bundles of restless energy. Like Ian, her oldest nephew. He was about Sophie's age, but you couldn't make him sit still for 5 minutes. He was always climbing somewhere, inventing something, running around the house like a hurricane. If the boy had suddenly found himself in this room, he would immediately start jumping on the trampoline or sliding down the slide. Elena called him a perpetual motion machine. And Mila and Christina weren't far behind their brother, even though they were younger. But Sophie lay there, poor thing, flat on her back, like a broken doll. "What should I read to you?" "About princesses. There's a book on the windowsill. Vera started reading it to me, but she's busy. Okay, you continue." It was a heavy, beautifully illustrated book with bright pictures. But the story itself. It seemed somehow silly, boring, predictable, and cliché to Julia. She herself hadn't liked such fairy tales as a child. "How about How about we make up a story about these princesses ourselves? Julia suggested, hoping to see a spark in the girl's eyes. As Julia expected, interest flickered in Sophie's tired eyes, as if a little light had ignited. How? She asked, raising her head. Very simple. I start, you continue. The activity captivated Sophie. She inventively made up adventures for the princess. Sometimes she rode in a race car, sometimes the heroine was kidnapped by a dragon and then rescued by a handsome prince. The girl's imagination flowed like a bursting spring. It seemed she had long lacked such communication, such flights of fancy. Then Vera entered the room. Seeing that Julia and Sophie were getting along, she was pleased, her face lit up with a kind smile. The woman brought lunch, cream soup, stewed vegetables. Sophie grimaced, as if at a sour lemon. I don't want it, she said, turning away. I don't want to eat at all, and especially not this. Vera looked at Julia with silent pleading. The woman clearly expected help from her. Let me feed you, Julia said to Sophie, her voice soft and gentle. Each spoonful is another princess adventure. I'll make them up as we go. Can you imagine how much I'll have to tell you? What do you think will run out first, your food or my imagination? The trick worked. The food finished faster than Julia's imagination, but Sophie demanded more stories. Vera threw up her hands in surprise, smiled, and left, leaving them alone. The nurse entered. Sophie immediately became gloomy, as if a cloud had covered the sun. She was almost asleep, the lunch and story had tired her, but it was time for procedures that could not be avoided. IV drip? The girl asked the nurse hopelessly, her voice filled with resignation. The nurse nodded sympathetically. I'll do it quickly. Don't be afraid, it won't hurt. You can sleep afterward, and we'll have some tea. Vera pulled Julia by the sleeve, leading her out of the room. You're not needed here right now. The housekeeper led Julia to the spacious, sun-drenched kitchen. Steaming cups of aromatic coffee and a pie that seemed to have just come out of the oven, exuding an inviting aroma, were already waiting on the table. I see you and Sophie are getting along, the woman smiled, looking warmly at Julia, joy shining in her eyes. That's good. Sophie sent the previous nanny away. She didn't accept her, but she took to you right away, as if you were family. I already called Victor, told him all about it. He's very pleased and happy. He ordered me to take care of you. I'm happy too, Julia smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. I just feel so sorry for Sophie. My nieces and nephews, they're so noisy, so cheerful, and she just lies in bed and can't even play anything. It's scary. It's unfair. What do the doctors say? Are there chances? No prognosis. Vera shook her head, her face clouded. They can't even make a diagnosis. They just treat the symptoms, that's all. Now, after the IV drip, Sophie will feel better for a while. You can go for a walk after her nap. Victor is the girl's father, I understood that. And where is her mother? On a business trip? Does she also have a demanding job so she can't spend time with her daughter? Ah, if only, Vera sighed, her voice quiet and sad. Our dear Helen. She's gone. The birth was difficult. The doctors were so focused on saving the baby, they didn't notice that the mother needed help. And she herself, Helen, didn't complain about anything. She worried more about the baby than about herself. That's how it turned out. The day after the birth, Helen's temperature rose, high. Examination, intensive care. While they were doing this and that, her heart stopped. Some kind of internal bleeding opened up in the poor thing, a rare case. And Sophie was also in intensive care. She was born prematurely, tiny. It was a difficult time, very difficult. How sad, Julia breathed out, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. Indeed, how sad, Vera agreed, wiping away an unbidden tear. Let me tell you the whole story. It seems you'll be with us for a long time, so you should know who you're living with. Victor grew up in a prosperous, complete family, loving mother and father, caring, attentive grandparents. His own room, trips to the sea every summer, lively birthdays, loyal friends. Victor had a happy childhood, like something out of an advertisement. His youth was no less happy. He graduated from school with a gold medal, largely thanks to his parents, who cared about their son's education. If they saw gaps, they immediately hired the best tutors for Victor. And the boy learned English in foreign camps. He vacationed and got an education at the same time. Trips to such places cost incredibly much, and they weren't easy to get. But for their beloved son, especially if he was so desired and long awaited. Victor had quite elderly parents. They couldn't have a child for many years. They had almost resigned themselves to a childless fate. But then, when hope was gone, life suddenly presented a surprise. It finally gave the couple an heir. Need I say that Victor was never ashamed of his parents? Yes, he saw that his mother and father were much older than his classmates' relatives, but the boy, on the contrary, was proud of them. Because Victor's father was a well-known businessman in the city, and his mother was the chief physician of the regional hospital. And everyone knew them, everyone respected them. It never occurred to Victor to be ashamed of his relatives. He loved and valued them. Victor grew up, his parents aged rapidly, declined. When the guy was in his 3rd year of university, his father passed away. A stroke, intensive care, coma. And that was it. Life ended suddenly. Victor then felt truly grown up for the first time. Of course, as a student, he had to delve into the affairs of the firm his parent had left him as an inheritance. No, Victor had been interested in his father's business since his teenage years. He knew a lot, even had the right to sign documents, and yet, for the first time, he entrusted most of the processes to the manager, a colleague, a long-time friend of his deceased parent. Because Victor needed to study and support his mother, who had declined greatly after her husband's death, like a wilting flower. 3 years passed. Victor had just received his diploma, had just taken charge of his father's company, had just started to gain strength. And then another blow, this time his mother. The guy was left completely alone in the world. Victor felt unhappy and lonely in the large parental home, which now seemed empty and cold. It was good that Vera, the housekeeper and almost a family member, was nearby. She had known Victor since he was a baby and treated him like her own son. The woman had no children of her own. She gave all her unspent care to the inconsolable young man. Work then pulled him out of the abyss of grief. He had to make decisions, go places, hold meetings, sign contracts, and all that stuff that required complete dedication. That's what saved Victor then, didn't let him drown in sorrow. Time passed. Victor transformed from a young, inexperienced guy into a smart, shrewd man, a talented businessman. Vera rejoiced, looking at her ward. He had matured, grown stronger, gained self-confidence, become a real man. The housekeeper really wanted him to find a good wife, marry her, and become a father. Only then would Vera's heart be at peace. She could retire. Only he didn't have anyone special, Vera said, as if remembering the distant past. No, some girls hovered around Victor like moths around a lamp. He was a handsome, wealthy guy. Such men are always in demand. But he would meet one, then another. None of them were right, not for his heart. I saw none of them were for Victor's heart, and I didn't like them either. It always seemed like they only wanted his money, some kind of coquettes, empty shells. And then Helen appeared. Victor met Helen literally on the street. She was walking on the sidewalk, hurrying somewhere, as if the wind was driving her forward. As it turned out later, she was going for an interview at Victor's firm. Helen had recently been laid off. The factory where she had worked for several years as an accountant after university had suddenly closed, like a house of cards collapsing. Helen was now looking for a new place in the sun, and Victor had gone out for a walk to get some air, to clear his head. He even had a goal: to buy donuts at the bakery around the corner, simple, tasty donuts. And then fate brought the young people face to face, literally. Helen rushed out from around the corner too quickly and bumped into the unsuspecting Victor. Then everything was like in some romantic music video. Helen's bag slipped off her shoulder, the contents scattered across the asphalt like autumn leaves. Victor and Helen rushed to pick everything up, their hands accidentally touching. The girl stammered apologies. Victor assured her that everything was fine and admired the girl's beautiful grey eyes, which reflected the sky. It was love at first sight, a spark that ignited between two hearts. When the young people had sorted out the bag and its spilled contents, they looked up and smiled at each other, and that smile held everything. And Victor, being a man, took the first step. He learned the beautiful stranger's name and then introduced himself. They walked slowly and talked, getting to know each other as if they had known each other all their lives. When Victor learned that Helen was hurrying to his office, he beamed, his face lit up with joy. He understood that this beautiful girl was his destiny, sent to him by heaven. And it wasn't by chance that they met in such an interesting way, instead of seeing each other for the first time in a stuffy office. It was more romantic, more interesting, more pleasant, like a movie script. In short, Vera had never seen Victor so happy. Helen turned out to be smart, understanding, kind. She also quickly found common ground with Vera, which was important, and became like a daughter to her. A sweet, sweet girl. And why did she have such a fate? Vera shook her head mournfully, her eyes filling with tears. A couple of years after meeting, Victor and Helen got married. They were a wonderful couple, harmonious, happy. Love, understanding, and respect reigned, as if they were made for each other. Vera's heart rejoiced when she saw them together, her beloved Victor and his wonderful, beautiful wife. They both decided not to rush with children. Vera continued her story, as if turning the pages of an old album. It was their joint decision, as if they felt something was wrong. They travelled, worked, met friends, lived for their own pleasure. And I, the fool, kept giving them old-fashioned advice not to delay. I wanted to hold a baby, a grandchild. Victor and Helen lived for themselves for a long time, 5 whole years after the wedding. They were happy together, cosy in their little world. No, they wanted children, but not right away, later. For now, everything suited them. And then the news of Helen's pregnancy. It was an unplanned event, a surprise from fate, but everyone in the household welcomed it joyfully. Well, it seems the time has come, Victor concluded, but decided that he had waited long enough. Thank God, Vera exclaimed, her face lit up with happiness. I think you'll have a boy. You've become so beautiful, Helen. Girls take their beauty from their mothers during pregnancy like little vampires. But the housekeeper was wrong. The ultrasound confirmed that Helen was expecting a girl, healthy, robust, like a ripe apple. They showed me her picture. They take pictures of babies. Vera smiled through tears. When I looked, she was the spitting image of Helen. That's how our Sophie was born, looking like her mother. Sophie, Helen chose the name for her daughter. Victor and Vera didn't object. They both liked it very much. The pregnancy wasn't very easy. At first, Helen suffered from morning sickness. Then it seemed to subside, but other problems replaced it: high blood pressure, swelling. The baby developed well, but the mother, she suffered, faded before their eyes, refused food, lay down a lot, exhausted. The usually energetic Helen didn't even have the strength to go downstairs. Vera carried her food right to the bedroom, carefully, as if feeding a chick. The woman felt sorry for Helen, helped her in any way she could, and assured her that after the birth of her daughter, everything would pass like a bad dream. Children don't come easily to women, Vera sighed. Pregnancy completely exhausted Helen, drained her. Look, remember your sister? Children came relatively easily to her, without much trouble. In short, Helen's labour began much earlier than expected. They had diagnosed a threat throughout the pregnancy, so fortunately, at that moment, the expectant mother was in the hospital under the doctor's supervision. They tried to stop the process, but it didn't work. Sophie was born. She didn't cry, didn't make a sound. They didn't place her on Helen's chest, didn't even show her to her. When it comes to newborns who need to stay in the womb for at least 3 more months, everything happens differently, according to different rules. Sophie was immediately sent to intensive care. A fierce and uncompromising battle for her tiny life began. And Helen? With Helen, everything seemed to be fine at first. Well, she was tired, of course, exhausted after childbirth. She was worried about her daughter, completely understandable and natural for any mother. The doctors examined the new mother, found no abnormalities, and sent her to a ward to rest. It was only later, when it was too late, that serious symptoms appeared, but time had been lost. Victor and I were worried about the girl. Vera was almost crying. It was clear that even now, 7 years later, it was hard for her to remember all this, as if the wound was bleeding. We thought the little one wouldn't survive. She was born too early, so weak, like a feather. Then, when the hospital called Victor in the morning and told him his wife had died from internal bleeding, he didn't even believe his ears at first, couldn't accept it. He thought they were talking about Sophie, that the baby hadn't survived. His mind refused to accept what he heard. But no, Sophie actually pulled through. She turned out to be a strong girl, a real fighter. But Helen, she was gone, and with him. She was gone from him, as if a part of him had died. I thought he wouldn't make it either, wouldn't bear it. But he recovered, found strength within himself. He had to work, he had to pull Sophie through, live for her sake. To be completely honest, though, at first he treated his daughter badly. He blamed her unfairly for what happened to Helen. He understood that it was wrong, that it wasn't right, but he couldn't help himself. He was angry with her, that was all. Sophie was discharged. A nanny was hired for her, but she couldn't take care of such a weak infant. Vera was too old for that, but she gladly played with Sophie, wheeled her around the yard in a stroller, talked to her a lot, sang her songs. And she was the only one who gave the newborn the much-needed love, motherly affection. The father was incapable of that during that period. His heart was closed by grief. "She's like a granddaughter to me," the housekeeper smiled, her face softening. "I accepted her right away, loved her with all my heart. But Victor, it took him a long time to warm up, a long time to reach her. No, he bought everything she needed, toys, clothes. Sometimes he went for walks with her, but only if I made him, literally pushed him out. He didn't show initiative himself, he was distant. And then, one day, Sophie got sick. Her temperature rose very high, nothing helped, as if there was fire inside her. She was vomiting, the poor thing. She was very bad. It was a nasty flu going around. It affected many people then. And little ones, they had a particularly hard time with it. Well, anyway, Sophie ended up back in the hospital. The doctors gave no prognosis, they just shrugged. And that's when Victor came to his senses, as if he had seen the light. He dropped everything, forgot about work, sat by his daughter's bedside for days on end, not leaving her side for a moment. He sang her songs, told her poems, rocked her in his arms, lulled her to sleep. And Sophie, she seemed to feel her father's care, his love. She immediately started to recover, as if she came back to life. Our little one was discharged, and Victor became completely different with her. A real father, loving and caring, his heart had thawed. Life went on. Victor worked hard, built his business, but always found time to spend with his daughter. Sophie grew, delighted her father and Vera with excellent health and rare intelligence, like a wise little old woman. And everything seemed fine. Life had settled down. Only Vera worried that Victor was still alone. It seemed to her that he wouldn't be completely happy until he met a woman, found his other half. Only now it was a very difficult task. Victor's chosen one had to love and accept Sophie as her own daughter. Otherwise, there could be no talk of any union, any family. Well, God heard my prayers, Vera smiled, her eyes shining with hope. And Victor met Laura, a beauty. You couldn't take your eyes off her, as if she stepped off a magazine cover, and smart too. She had a child of her own, a daughter, a little younger than Sophie. It seemed like a perfect family. Laura got a job at Victor's firm, and it all started at some corporate event. A spark flew. In short, a typical love story. Laura treated Sophie well, at least outwardly. She often took her and her younger daughter somewhere, sometimes to the amusement park, sometimes to the cinema, sometimes to a cafe. Sophie loved both Laura and her younger stepsister, Alice. She was truly happy. It seemed she finally had a complete family. Victor and Laura got married, started living together under one roof. And then Sophie started having these symptoms. First dizziness, then nausea, weakness, loss of appetite. Examinations at the best clinics, trips to doctors abroad, consultations with renowned professors. All of this yielded no results, as if the doctors were powerless against an unknown force. The girl was fading before their eyes, wasting away like a candle in the wind. The first year she was still okay, on her feet. Vera was almost crying again. It was clear that her heart genuinely ached for the little girl, as if she were her own granddaughter. But after the new year, she took to her bed completely, doesn't get up. She's not well now, very unwell. It's so scary for her. And it's unclear what kind of illness has struck our little one, where it came from. Laura and her daughter temporarily moved back to her apartment. It's just that Alice went to kindergarten, brought infections home from there, and for Sophie, that was extremely dangerous. Any virus could be the last. So Laura and Victor made that decision. No, Laura comes often, almost every day. She's a good woman. She visits Sophie, takes care of her. And she sometimes brings Alice too when she's not sick. But ever since she started kindergarten, it's been one sick leave after another. So that's how it is for them. The wife with one child separately, the husband with the older daughter separately. Such a family, divided by illness. Well, what can you do? It's a hopeless situation. It's a strange situation all the same, Julia said, feeling a chill run down her spine. She was shaken by the story of Victor and Sophie, as if she were listening to the script of a dramatic film. Well, that's how it is, the elderly woman shrugged, sighing. I see you've gotten along with Sophie. That's good. Everything will be more pleasant with you when there's understanding. Days flowed into days. merging into a continuous stream. Julia now lived in a room next to Sophie's nursery, but the girl often asked her nanny to stay in her bedroom for the night, as if she was afraid of being alone in the dark. Sophie had a very comfortable sofa there. Julia made her bed on it. They talked before bed, held hands, shared secrets. Julia saw this was very important to Sophie. It gave her strength. The girl clearly lacked simple human attention, despite having many adults around her. Victor was a very caring and anxious father. His love for his daughter was evident in everything. He was a pleasant person to talk to, intelligent and attentive. They often talked about Sophie, about her condition, about hopes for recovery. The man always listened carefully to Julia, didn't interrupt or argue, asked the right questions, as if he was searching for answers. Julia also met Laura. Yes, she was a very beautiful woman. Chiseled cheekbones, beautifully curved lips, the grace of a panther, as if she had stepped off a magazine cover. A real queen, cold and unapproachable. But when Laura interacted with Sophie, when she adjusted the blanket on the girl, smiled at her, stroked the little one's head, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was faking it, playing a role. This manifested itself in seemingly insignificant details, a cold glint in her eyes, a forced, unnatural smile, an elusive and very unpleasant feeling of rejection. One day, Julia had a strange, frightening dream. The girl found herself in a room, peeling wallpaper, like skin stripped from the living, creaking floors under her feet. She sat on a wobbly stool by a dark window through which nothing could be seen, only impenetrable darkness. And she knew she was sleeping, but couldn't wake up. She desperately wanted to escape this nightmare. But then, where did she come from? Helen seemed to grow out of the air before her. Julia recognized her because she had seen Sophie's mother in the photographs hanging in the house. Helen smiled sadly and looked at Julia with a warm and very gentle gaze, full of sorrow. "Watch her," she said in a quiet, melodious voice like a breath of wind. "Watch Laura. All the troubles come from her. She is dangerous." Having said this, she dissolved into the air, disappeared as if she had never been there. And Julia had wanted to ask her so many questions. How to watch? Why? How was she dangerous? Julia woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding madly in her chest. Or rather, she felt as if she had flown into her body, falling into it from a great height, a strange, frightening sensation. Helen's words still echoed in her head. No, Julia didn't believe in the supernatural, in ghosts and warning dreams. But the dream, which hardly resembled a dream at all, it was more like a journey through time and worlds, a message from the other side. The strange dream wouldn't let go, wouldn't give her peace. Laura wasn't there the next day, and Julia waited for her, like a predator waiting for its prey. She knew for sure, she felt it. This woman was involved in something bad, something terrible. Laura was somehow harming this family and didn't love Sophie. She hated her. She didn't sympathize with the girl. She only pretended to care, played the role of a caring stepmother. And how could the others not notice it? How could they be so blind? Even the experienced, long-lived Vera. Laura appeared the next day, as always, beautiful, heavily made up, languid, like a movie star. The first thing she did was go upstairs to greet Sophie, feigning concern. Then she went down to the kitchen. "Sophie wants something to drink," Laura said, looking at Vera. "Let me make her some cocoa." "Let me do it," the housekeeper bustled, always ready to help. "No, I can manage. I want to make it for her myself." "You're so thoughtful," Vera exclaimed, not noticing the trick. Julia was silent, as if mute. She watched Laura just as Helen had asked her to in that strange dream. For some reason, it seemed that this was it, the important moment, the decisive one, as if Helen was nearby, invisible, and was prompting her to be vigilant, to watch closely. Vera was busy with the dough, absorbed in her work. Julia pretended to look out the window, admiring the scenery, but she watched Laura, not taking her eyes off her. And there it was. The woman deftly pulled a small vial from her sleeve, like a magician, dripped a few drops from it into the milk, and immediately hid the vial back. Just a couple of seconds, a few skillful, practiced movements. But Julia saw everything. Nothing escaped her watchful gaze. "The drink for the princess is ready," Laura smiled, her smile cold and unnatural. "Julia, could you please hand me her favorite cup?" Julia obeyed as if under hypnosis. She took Sophie's cup with characters from the girl's favorite cartoon, and she understood with horror. Sophie must not drink this. She must not. She had to act, not delay for a minute. Julia pretended to slip. She bumped into Laura, who dropped the cup from her hands. The cup fell, shattering into pieces, like fragile hope. The cocoa spilled onto the floor in a dark, ominous puddle. "I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy." Julia bustled, grabbed a rag, and began wiping up the spilled puddle, collecting the glass shards. "It's nothing. I'll make another one." Laura's voice held poorly concealed irritation, anger. Julia couldn't do that again. It would arouse suspicion. It would ruin everything. So she had to accept that Sophie would receive the cocoa from her stepmother's hands. While Laura and Vera were with Sophie, Julia, with trembling hands, wrung out the rag she had used to wipe up the cocoa into a clean jar. She needed to know exactly what Laura had put in the cocoa. Maybe it was just ordinary vitamins, and then there was no point in causing a panic, sowing discord. But something told the girl that this wasn't the case, that it was something terrible. She had to wait 2 long, agonizing days for the test results. Seeing the report, Julia was horrified. The drink contained poison, lethal. The symptoms of poisoning matched Sophie's. This meant the girl's weakness was explained by the fact that her stepmother was systematically poisoning her, slowly killing her. Just like in a scary fairy tale where the wicked stepmother torments her stepdaughter. Julia didn't know who to turn to with her terrible news. Vera? But what could she do? An elderly woman? Victor? He might not believe her, might think Julia had gone mad. How could she proceed? Laura must not be allowed near the girl again. She wanted to send her to the next world, and had almost succeeded in her monstrous endeavour. And yet Julia, gathering her courage, as if before a leap into the abyss, spoke with Victor. She told him everything about her strange dream, about the cocoa, and about the lab results, as if she had dumped a sack of stones on him. Julia was afraid he would yell at her, call her crazy, kick her out, or worse, accuse her of wanting to harm his daughter herself. "You know," Victor said, looking at Julia with a long, attentive gaze, "I probably would have fired you immediately after those words. It's very strange, you'll agree. But just yesterday, I also had an unusual dream. Helen. She asked me to believe you. Just believe, nothing more. For now, let's not tell anyone about this, and take some time off. I need to look into everything, get to the bottom of the truth. Vera will call you when you can come back to work." Julia spent those few days on edge, unable to find peace. She didn't know what was happening at Victor's house and was very worried about Sophie, to whom she had already become attached with all her soul, as if to her own child. But Victor said to wait for the call, so she would wait for as long as it took. Vera called. Julia, seeing her name on the phone screen, became anxious. Her heart stopped in anticipation. What would she be told now? How had everything gone? "Come," Vera said, her voice sounding agitated. "Come quickly. Sophie misses you very much." Julia didn't need much persuading. Half an hour later, she was at Victor's house. The owner himself opened the door. He was as calm and outwardly composed as ever, but his eyes showed relief. From his appearance, it was difficult to guess what had happened during those days. "I want to thank you." The man finally allowed himself to smile, and this smile was sincere, from the bottom of his heart. "You were right. Laura. She really wanted to. I'm even afraid to say it out loud. That wretch wanted to poison Sophie." "Can you imagine?" Vera didn't hold back, her voice trembling with indignation. "And I trusted her so much, as if she were myself." The story turned out to be commonplace and old as the world, steeped in greed and envy. The greedy Laura was not going to tolerate a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's beloved daughter. She wanted her own daughter, Alice, to be the sole heir to Victor's entire fortune. Well, first herself, of course, and then her daughter. Laura had once studied to be a pharmacist, though she never worked in the profession for a day, preferring to live off wealthy admirers. Nature had generously endowed her with beauty, so the woman had opportunities for such a life. The knowledge gained in college was enough to devise a way to send her hated stepdaughter to the next world. Poison. A poison that was difficult to detect in the blood, that killed slowly, leaving no traces. And Laura added the toxic substance to the food she prepared for Sophie, to her drinks. And the girl weakened, slowly fading away, approaching the edge. She was just a step away from her goal. "It's unbelievable, unfathomable," Vera kept saying, shaking her head. Julia understood her. Indeed, Laura's act was monstrous, inhuman. How could she do such a thing to a defenseless child who trusted her, who loved her? In short, Victor installed surveillance cameras in the kitchen, hidden from view. That's how it was discovered that Laura added poison to Sophie's food every time. Sometimes she cooked something for the girl herself. Sometimes she was cunning. She poured from the vial into food prepared by Vera, taking advantage of her kindness. "I myself carried that poison to Sophie with my own hands." Vera was almost crying again, her voice breaking. In short, Laura was caught red-handed, the crime recorded on video. She was now under investigation, awaiting trial. Alice was taken by her father, a man who had long wanted to be with his child, but was prevented from doing so because he was too poor for it, unworthy in Laura's eyes. "Alice will be fine," Vera assured. "The child is not to blame for what her mother wanted to do." "And Sophie, how is she?" Julia asked anxiously. "And Sophie is wonderful," a clear voice rang out from somewhere behind her, like a song. Julia turned around and met Sophie's eyes. She was still very thin and pale, but she already had the strength to walk around the house, on her own, without assistance. A real miracle, as if a fairy had touched her with a magic wand. The doctors said that now she would quickly recover, her body would cleanse itself of the poison. Julia and Alex strolled slowly along the windows of a children's store, holding hands. It was the girls' section, so it seemed to both of them as if they had entered a kingdom of pink and purple, a world of dolls and magic. Dolls, children's cosmetic sets, soft toys. Their eyes darted from the abundance. "When I was in the States, one guy bought his nephew a voice-controlled robot. That's something. Maybe Sophie would like something like that," Alex suggested, recalling American wonders. "She's a girl," Julia reminded him, smiling. "She definitely wants a doll, a cartoon character. We need to try to find one. Maybe by her next birthday, she won't want toys at all. She'll be completely grown up. Children grow up so fast, you don't even notice. Amazing. We'll see for ourselves soon, Alex said, placing his hand gently on Julia's growing belly. The baby stirred in response, as if recognizing its father's touch, still a faint kick, but strong enough to be felt. And that one still needed a job. And Julia had already gotten used to everyone in this house. The sweet, cheerful girl, the kind, wise Vera, the perpetually busy but polite and attentive Victor. She didn't want to part with them. They had become family. The adults had initially decided not to tell Sophie the full truth about what had happened to her, considering the story too terrible for a child's psyche. But the clever girl managed to put two and two together. She overheard something, she figured something out herself. This story didn't have a strong, destructive effect on her, as the adults feared. Sophie took everything quite calmly, with philosophical composure. "It's all like in fairy tales," the girl shrugged, as if it were perfectly normal. The little one was returning to life, gaining strength. In September, she started school with her peers, radiant and happy. And Julia? Julia was finally able to re-enroll in the university, fulfilling her long-held dream. She chose distance learning because she needed not only to study, but also to work. True, her work now resembled life in a family with the dear people she had found here, sweet, cheerful Sophie, kind, wise Vera, perpetually busy but polite and attentive Victor. With these people, Julia felt cozy, warm, and comfortable, as if she had found her real home. They accepted her, loved her, and were also immensely grateful to her for saving Sophie. It was scary to think what could have happened if it hadn't been for that strange dream, if it hadn't been for the voice from the past. They discussed this unusual event, trying to find an explanation, first with Victor, then with Vera. Vera was sure Helen had broken through time and worlds, through the veil of death, to save her daughter, to warn them. Victor just shook his head, didn't voice his opinion, remaining a rationalist. And Julia? She didn't know what to think. Her mind wavered between logic and the inexplicable. Perhaps Laura had immediately aroused her subconscious suspicion because Sophie's stepmother hadn't appealed to her from the first glance. She had caused repulsion, in the dream only. Well, Victor also dreamed of Helen, and she asked him to believe Julia, just believe, without explanations. That was harder to explain. It went beyond the ordinary. That day, Julia left the house alone. Sophie was doing her homework. Vera was busy with household chores, as always. Julia needed to go to the university, take some documents to the dean's office, formalities. And then suddenly, Alex stepped towards her. Julia couldn't believe her eyes. She recoiled as if she had seen a ghost. He looked at Julia as if there was no one more important to him in this world, as if she was the center of his universe. "I finally found you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, and unable to restrain himself, he pulled her to him, tightly, as if afraid to let go. Julia didn't understand anything. Her brain refused to process the information, but she didn't resist. She pressed herself against the man she loved, inhaled his scent, enjoyed his closeness, and tried not to think about Alex's betrayal, about his sudden disappearance, about the pain she had experienced. The explanation turned out to be ridiculously simple, almost absurd. Alex had simply dropped his phone in the ocean during a boat trip. Naturally, the gadget disappeared irretrievably, went to the bottom. Julia wasn't registered on social media, so he simply couldn't contact her. There was no way. Alex wrote letters, like in the good old days, sent telegrams, hoping to reach her. but Julia. She had moved in with Victor and hardly ever went home, so the letters accumulated in the mailbox. When she returned home, she saw that the mailbox door was broken. Someone had broken it open. Someone had opened the box for some reason and taken the letters. Maybe children, maybe a nosy neighbour looking for gossip. In short, Julia received no news from Alex, which is why she decided he had forgotten about her, started a new life, betrayed her, left her alone. I couldn't drop everything and leave. It was about my career and our future, our well-being. Without you, without news of you, it was unbearable. Every day was torture. But I knew I would have to wait. And then financially, I would provide for us for many years to come. I could give you everything you deserve. And then I could fly to you and explain everything, tell you the truth. I had no idea what a difficult situation you were in, how hard it was for you. I didn't know you had to take out a loan. I knew nothing about you quitting. How hard it must have been for you, my dear. Just like that. An unfortunate turn of events, a cruel twist of fate. Julia rejoiced that her feelings and Alex's feelings were real, that there was no betrayal or deception in her life, only a misunderstanding. Just a misunderstanding that had finally been resolved, like a knot untied. Alex now had a contract with a famous metropolitan producer. He had everything he dreamed of: concerts, performances, tours, opportunities to bring his music to people who were ready to accept it, who were waiting for it. And money, of course, the money he had lacked so much. Alex even managed to buy an apartment for the two of them, their family nest. Right now, renovations were in full swing, preparing for a new life. Julia and Alex got married. They were already expecting a child, the fruit of their shared love. Julia felt happy and loved, finally finding harmony. She no longer worked for Victor on a permanent basis, and the strengthened and grown-up Sophie didn't need a round-the-clock nanny sitter. But they all remained friends, a real family, bound not by blood, but by love and gratitude. And right now, Julia and Alex were choosing something for their future baby.